herzlich willkommen, Fiona Tan. Es ist eine große Ehre, dass du heute hier bist und wir sprechen können. Es ist wahrscheinlich ja mit Sicherheit der letzte Artist Talk im Oktober 2020. Wie das dann weitergeht, ob wir im nächsten Monat weitere Veranstaltungen haben können, das wird sich zeigen. Der Himmel ist bewölkt, aber die Wolken werden sich auch wieder verziehen. Und schön, dass Sie und ihr alle so zahlreich gekommen seid. Wir haben ja normalerweise Platz für 100 Personen, mittlerweile, heute sind es 35, das ist aber ein gutes Zeichen bei dem guten Wetter, also herzlichen Dank. Und wir werden etwa eine Dreiviertelstunde miteinander sprechen und danach wird es dann die Möglichkeit geben, Fragen zu stellen. Das ist der Verlauf. Okay. So, welcome in English, Fiona. Okay. So we have to start now. So it's really lovely to have you here, and we had the opening yesterday, and I think for the audience it's maybe quite interesting to hear first of all something about the concept of the show for Salzburg, because we are not only talking about the exhibition here in Salzburg, we have also another venue. If God allowed that, or Corona allowed that, we will have it in 3 weeks. We will have an opening in Krems, in the Kunsthalle Krems, and so we have a double exhibition, and that is, as far as I know, the biggest exhibition you ever did.
Yeah,
so it's yeah. 2 venues, and in total about 12 or 14 installations, so really a huge project. Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. Usually when I am starting a concept for an exhibition, I quite often like to start with a key work, so a central piece around which then from which I start, and then I place other works in relation to that piece. And when I came here to see the museum and to talk with you and to see the city for the first time last year, I was struck by this so special and beautiful location surrounded by mountains, and that you just, I mean, and the museum in particular, you just look out the window and there it all is. And I live in a very flat country. You know, the Netherlands is flat as a pancake, as we say. So this is a really special location. And I made this quite big installation, Ascent, a few years ago, which is about and centered around Mount Fuji, so another mountain. And I thought, how would it be if I sort of, you know, teleport Mount Fuji into this location and see how that works. And so that was my sort of first idea. And then from there on, other works were arranged around that. So in many ways, it's kind of an exhibition which is one big journey or a lot of smaller journeys. So there's Brendan's Isle on the first floor, which is an audio piece about a journey over the sea in search of heaven on earth, literally, because Brendan's Isle was thought to be heaven on earth. We can maybe go into that work later. And then upstairs there are 6 major pieces, including the new piece that I filmed in the mountains here, Grey Glass. So that is a sort of that's the mountainous side of the exhibition, and then there's the sea side of the exhibition, if you like. So and then there's a disorientation in between. It's
a sort of site-specific, so the connection with the mountains.
You could say so, and then in Krems, something that particularly struck me, or perhaps I'm kind of a bit sensitive to, that is well, it's unusual, I think it's highly unusual, that the Krems Kunsthalle is literally in the same building as a prison. And there's just a dividing wall, so I just had this really strange feeling of, okay, so behind that wall there are people incarcerated, and wow, that's kind of weird. And so I filmed this piece called Correction in American prisons, and they have a very a nice central hall on the ground floor, and I thought, well, that would be really interesting if I could present that piece in this very particular context. So that was my two starting points for both exhibitions. And then, thinking about, we decided to consider it as a kind of a mid-career retrospective. Retrospective always is a bit of a word that artists don't like to use, because then you think like, right, I'm dying, I'm dead, you know, I'm gone. So a mid-career is kind of softening the blow a bit.
So next 50 years.
But okay, you know, I'm past 50 now, so I just have to come to terms with the graying hair and all the rest of it. So yeah.
But you have also chosen this Orient. And from my point of view, it's one of the masterpieces you realized, and so that was created for the Venice Biennale 2009, and that is dealing with the Western, the relationship between Occident and Orient.
Yes.
And the images we have in mind when we think about the Orient. So all these promises on one hand, but today the promises are no longer there. So we have a more dystopian view of the Far East.
Yeah.
So
but it's still very pervasive, this paradigm of East and West, but that's something I find really interesting about Austria also, that you feel, at least, you know, because I live in the Netherlands, the feeling of the East is, and it's Österreich, right? So it is the Eastern realm.
It's stronger here, yes.
It's very strong, and I find that really fascinating. So in Vienna, I took part in a couple of group shows in Vienna recently. So just hearing the Hungarian and the Czech, and I mean, you know, it's everywhere, and I'm fascinated by that. Yeah.
But for this Orient, you used the historical figure of Marco Polo.
Yeah.
And why are you so fascinated by Marco Polo?
Well, when I was asked to do the solo presentation in the Dutch pavilion in Venice, I went with the curator to visit Venice, and we were talking about this very important geopolitical location of Venice, which was like the gateway to the East. It's the start of the Silk Route. And you know, that's how it became so rich, and you also feel that very strongly in Venice. And so I came back from that trip and was, you know, obviously everyone knows Marco Polo and it's kind of a cliche, but as you well know, I very much like Italo Calvino's writing, and he has this very nice imagined conversation between Kubla Khan and Marco Polo. So I thought, okay, I'm going to read Marco Polo's travels, which I did, and that got me started. I mean, firstly, I should maybe explain a couple of things about that book, because that's already the wrong description, because it's not a book, and it's not, the original was lost, and Marco Polo didn't even write it himself. It was written by Rustichelli and written in, I think, mainly Old French, if I remember correctly.
Yes, yeah.
And there are approximately 100 old translations, of which none of them is entirely sure that it is the real one. And every translator has made some embellishments, has left some things out, has added some other things. So actually, it's quite hard to know what really was Marco Polo's memories and his journal, and what has been added. But I quite like the fact that this is, I think, as real life is, that it's always quite messy, and that you never really sure where. There's never one truth. So I ended up reading 3 translations, and then chose one to concentrate on. And then the thing that struck me most was, okay, everybody knows about the fact that he went to Kublai Khan and Xanadu and this, you know, fantastic sort of idea of China at that time. But Marco Polo he wrote, at least the way I understand it, he wrote down as much as he could remember, and he had a lot of time in prison there in Genoa to remember it all. It's like he's really describing how you get there. So he's not only talking about China, he's describing every single village he passed through to get there. And then he lived in China for 17 years. He was working as a tax collector for China. And so he was traveling around a lot, and then he came back after 17 years overseas. So he really traveled an enormous amount. But the book is also full of things he's heard of. So he describes Georgia or Russia or Japan, but he didn't actually go there. But he doesn't say that. But I thought it was really quite funny, because it's sort of like, okay, so you end up in, let's say, somewhere in Afghanistan, right? Because you have to go over the deserts to get to China. When you get to Afghanistan, on the right there will be this village, and on the left there's that village, and then at the end of the road there's a tree. At the tree you turn right, and then by the third tree you turn left. And it's, I mean, 800 years later, it's ridiculous to be reading a text like that, because it's sort of like presuming nothing's changed. But it's kind of fascinating also. So on the one hand, it's a sort of like a blow-by-blow description of passing the Gobi Desert. Crossing the Gobi Desert, you'd need 40 camels at least, and lots of water. And I mean, that's all still true. And what he writes about Tibet is also still true. There's so many things which are still true, but then obviously there's his kind of point of view, and he was a merchant. So my shorthand for Marco Polo's book is it's an IKEA guide to the world. So you go there, you can buy this. You go there, you can buy that. So it's just, you can get good jewelry here, and good stones here, and good silk there, and watch out for robbers here, and
but that is the narrative. The pictures you have chosen are telling another story.
They're telling another story, and also so what I ended up doing was, I sort of thought, wow. So Marco Polo started in Venice, and then came back to Venice 17 or 23, I forget now, years later, when he was 43. And what would he have brought with him if he could bring everything back with him that he wanted? And so I ended up transporting 2 truckloads full of stuff to the pavilion and building it up like my imagination of his private museum, or the depot of his private museum. And I wanted it to look exotic and attractive, and like all the kind of things that you like about when you think Far East. And so we built it all up, huge film set. We filmed it for a few days, and then I took it all down and took it all back to Belgium and the Netherlands again. And so when you're standing, seeing Disorient in the pavilion itself, if you watch for long enough, at a certain time you realize, hang on a minute, that was here. So again, a very clear sort of political and geopolitical location, and site-specific in that way. So that was on the one hand. And then I decided to juxtapose that with contemporary footage of what he's talking about. So, and it is quite accurate. So he's talking about some islands of India, and that's what you're seeing. And he's talking about China or Japan, and that's what you're seeing, or Georgia. So, and it's also like a bit of a bridge between 800 years. So, and then the question of, okay, so this is global economics now, but also even then, because there was a lot of trade, and how much has actually changed. That's this orient. Yeah.
But the pictures you have chosen are also showing a situation and a picture of the world that is really a sort of there's no longer any illusion, so there's no longer, that's not very hopeful. There are a lot of pictures by conflicts, the pollution of the environment is quite clear to see, and the medieval fascination of the world, meeting the unknown, the other with open eyes. That's no longer the message by the pictures, I think.
No. So it's deconstructing an illusion, if you like. Yeah.
So would you call that a dystopian work?
No, not necessarily. Possibly, yeah, but it's just basically realistic, I think.
Yeah. But I'm asking that question because you have some other works that are dealing with the idea of utopia.
Yeah.
So one of the installations that will be on display in Krems elsewhere.
Yeah.
It's inspired by utopian literature, Thomas Moos and Tommaso Campanella.
Yeah.
And also you mentioned before the Brandon's Isle, so the longing after the island of the blessed. So that's a typical Christian idea. So to look for this paradise in the middle of nowhere in the ocean.
Yeah.
So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that. How much you are fascinated by the idea of utopian islands.
Yeah, well, I have a thing with the sea, I suppose, and with water, and also with islands. I've made quite a few, well, at least 3, I think, pieces which are dealing with islands. There's a piece called Cloud Island, which I filmed on this tiny little island in Japan. And Brandon's Isle is a sound piece because it's about an invisible island. So it's an island that you can actually only sort of imagine. But I really like this idea of. So it was. It's a kind of a legend, and it's been around for many hundreds of years. And so they used to think that when before America was discovered, that this is, you know, from the European point of view, they used to think that there was an edge, an end, and at the end of the world there were these insule fortunate, so these blessed islands, and one of these was Brendan's Isle. And so Brendan was an Irish monk from the 7th century, and you know, in the Middle East it used to be, or what you call the Middle East, it used to be that you had to go into the desert to get closer to God, or to sort of become holy, and Brendan had to go to the sea because he was in Ireland. It sort of makes more sense. And so he went, they say he went on a 7-year journey, and what I find really funny is he found it. So he found paradise on earth, this amazing island where there's always enough to eat, and the sun is always shining, and there are birds always singing, and there are 4 rivers, and it's all very beautiful. But he found it, and then like 2 weeks later he left and went back home. So yeah, you know, I think I would have stayed longer, but anyway. But it's also fascinating to me because this island then migrates, so it pops up in all ancient maps, and Columbus seriously tried to find it when he was crossing the Atlantic Ocean. And at some point it's quite close to China, and then it's closer to Spain and the Canary Islands, and so it sort of moves around. And I also like this idea of an island that sort of pops up and then disappears and then pops up somewhere else.
Yeah. Maybe we have to add that Brandon is regarded as the person who has been first in America. So
yes.
So it's and there has been an Irish journalist to try the kind of reenactment of that journey, so successfully. So it's very interesting.
Yeah.
So, but that is the inspiration by the idea of utopia. So utopia, I mean, that means a non-place. So that's a place that you cannot find, and that's especially a special place that is very good for projections. So it's good to build new ideas in the middle of nowhere, so to speak.
Yeah.
So and that's a very central fascination in your work, I think.
Well,
I have seen it
it's one
several times.
that's been coming up. Yeah, and coming up recently because I've been thinking about why is it that we find it so easy to imagine dystopia and this time, the area that we're living in now, and why is utopia so far away? I guess that's just me trying to figure out.
Yeah.
Because modernism is also a kind of utopia, and when you look at it in art history terms, then
so Brandon and the other monks, they celebrated Easter on the back of a whale. So a swimming island.
And the whale woke up because they made a fire.
Yes, and the whale could speak also. That is very interesting. Yeah. So, but we have in the exhibition, we have a work, other video work, Leviathan, and that is a sort of requiem.
Yes, it's an elegy, if you like.
Yes,
yes. Yeah, and it's only once an hour, so it's actually, you can tell the time from it. So it's like a clock strikes on the hour, and then Leviathan starts playing. It's made from very old footage, which is there's nothing known really about the footage. They're not even sure where it's from. It was silent originally, and
but it's from British archives of.
Oh no, it's from the Dutch archives.
From the Dutch archives. Okay.
I think it was probably filmed in America. I think from when I look at their clothing, so it's sort of this industrial processing of whales. So whales have been caught, and they've been dragged up onto land. And there are these workers, in Dutch we call it flensen, so it's skinning the whale, you take the blubber of the whale. And for art, contemporary eyes, it's very sad material because it's quite shocking, And the thing that I find really shocking about it is that you can just tell by the way that they're working, they've done it 1,000 times before. It's very routine what they're doing, and just walking on top of a whale like it's a mountain or a hill. And so I commissioned a really good composer, a friend of mine. She's a Greek composer, Calliope Tsupaki, to write a piece. And I just showed her the images, and then she said, "Okay." And I didn't want it to be like film music, that it's somehow very closely connected to the edit. And then the first time I showed it in the Baltic, in Gateshead in the north of England, it was a performance. So we did it as a live performance, and then after that I can present it like this. That's. When I was a girl, I wanted to be a marine biologist, so I suppose that's coming back again now. My interest in whales and in marine life, and interest in how our attitudes have changed also to nature and to the sea, and
Let's talk a bit about your position as a conceptual artist. I mean, you are a filmmaker, a photographer, you are a writer as well. So but in the relation between photography and filmmaking, that is crucial for your work. That you are in many works you are dealing with the relation between film and photography.
Yeah.
And for instance, Escent is a film that is totally based on photography.
Yeah.
So moving images and the frozen moment in photography. I think that is very fascinating for you that you come back to this point.
I sort of quite often revisit it. I'm still trying to figure out what is like the key or the core of photography, and how does that relate to film, and I'm really trying to sort of find the essence. And I'm coming at it, I think, mostly from two directions. So I'm coming at it from the moving image side and then from the photographic side. And that started as a bit of an accident. So I kind of by accident, a long time ago, started working with fragments, film fragments that I found in film archives. And there's one piece that I made that is quite well known called Facing Forward, which is made from ethnographical or colonial footage. And what I said to myself is, what I noticed is that this is really early footage. And there's a kind of an unsophistication which I find really, really interesting in this footage. And so it's film material, but it's like almost like the cameraman hasn't quite understood yet that the material is moving and that time is passing. So they ask people to, and then in this case it's quite often people from other cultures and in different places. They ask them to pose in front of the camera, and then that's it. So the person is standing there in front of the camera, and the time, you know, the cameraman's turning the crank, so the film is being taken. But the people standing in front of the camera don't know what to do because no one's told them to do anything. And so I call them photographic moments, and I find them incredibly revealing because of this unsophistication. So the cameraman or the director or whatever hasn't said to them, so pretend we're not here, don't look in the camera, you know, what the mantras of any documentary filmmaker now, and just, you know, continue cooking or doing whatever it is you were doing. They just stand there doing nothing and get a bit embarrassed or get a bit bored or get a bit angry or something, and you can sort of see all this. And I find them really, really interesting and very kind of honest. And so despite, for example, with that material, the fact that it's often problematic colonial material, I found these images are worth looking at and worth reviewing and interesting to sort of put one after the other to sort of compare. And so that was a starting point for me and something that I found really interesting. And then from then I started using that very bad way of filming myself. And I continue to do that. So with countenance, which is something that I made for the documenter a while ago, I filmed people in Berlin in the same way. And in correction, so filming the American prisoners and guards, I also just asked them to stand in front of the camera for a minute. And that's it. So I learned that from this very early film material. So that's the one side. I'm taking a long time to answer the question, sorry.
No problem at all.
From the one side, there's me filming as if I'm not filming. So I'm stretching out time and making time very visceral. And it's very different than a photograph. So a photograph you just glance at and you sort of think, yeah, seen it. Whereas when I conceived countenance, I thought of it a bit like a library. So okay, I present 230 different portraits of people living in Berlin with their professions or whatever they're doing. Obviously inspired by August Sander's unfinished project, People of the 20th Century. But I thought, okay, people will dip in and dip out. They might stay for a little bit and then maybe, hopefully, come back later. But people tell me I've watched it the whole way through twice, which is like 3 hours, you know. And they say to me, and I find this also very interesting, this is human psychology, they say, yeah, it feels impolite to turn away. So they're engaging with an image, which is looking at them, and they're sort of like, yeah, I can't leave yet. And I hadn't...
Yes, it's like a living picture, yes.
Yeah, I hadn't actually realized that before. Yeah. So that's the one side. And then the other side is I end up ended up also, I guess, more by accident than by design, trying to animate still images, which I've done in different ways in different works. So there's a piece not in either of these exhibitions called The Changeling, where I have found this album of Japanese schoolgirls' photos, so like these little passport photos, and that inspired me to think about my time in high school, so I wrote a monologue for these images, and that's very similar to the new piece that I've created for Krems called Pickpockets, which is an amazing album of about 250 pickpockets who were caught at the World Fair in Paris in 1889. And I'm also trying to give these images, these faces, a voice. Ascent, the film with and about Mount Fuji, is in some ways a kind of a portrait of a mountain, I suppose. Mm-hmm. Made entirely with photographic photos of Mount Fuji, not taken by me. The starting point was a mountain of images, so I could collect 4,000 images of Mount Fuji. And when I conceived that piece, I thought it would be maybe a piece of about 10 minutes. But then they sent me all those images, and I printed them all out, and I had them spread out on the floor of my studio, and I was just trying to organize them and understand what am I looking at and what am I seeing, and that started me into research to try and understand better, okay, what does Mount Fuji mean for Japanese people, and how can I relate to that? And I also made a mistake because I thought I would be getting images which are mostly from the same point of view. So like Mont Blanc or some of the iconic mountains here in Europe, you can mostly recognize them only from one side. But Mount Fuji is this huge volcano all on its own, and so you can see it from many sides, and it's in the most populated area of Japan. So, I got so many different photographs from so many different angles, and it's really striking. I got incredibly crappy photos from old mobile phones. You can see almost nothing at all, but you always recognize this conic form of Mount Fuji. And so then at a certain point I thought, wow, could I maybe make a whole sort of cinematic film just with still images? And then of course there are, big examples like Chris Marker's La Jetée, obviously. And La Jetée is 24 minutes long, so I thought, okay, I'm going to try and be longer. And I'm going to try, competition. Yeah, I wanted to try and sort of make magic. So I wanted to get the images moving, even though they're not. And well, you can see for yourself whether I did or didn't.
I think it's striking that the idea of identity is still quite important for your work. So you are talking about the identity of a mountain, and I know that you don't like that phrase anymore. So, but very early you called yourself a professional foreigner.
I did, and I wish I hadn't.
And that was a sort of label. So, so you have that. So that. We talked about that yesterday, about the ethnographic turn in the 19th, after the last century, and so, and for me, I mean, it's a good label for your early work. I think that fits very well.
Yeah.
But I think there has been a point in your artistic development that you have to leave that back. So to do something different and to come out of that label that you are a professional for intercultural relationships.
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem that I have. I mean, many authors have have a similar problem, that they become connected to their first bestseller or something, and then they're the writer who is dealing with such and such, whereas nobody wants to be pigeonholed in that way. And since I'm a migrant with a mixed background, then it feels like I'm being stigmatized again. If as an artist I'm only allowed to talk about post-culturalism or multicultural identity or migration issues, or then I sort of think, and I think it's sort of I can understand you want to be able to sort of place artists in particular areas, and obviously the press they never have enough time to think and write, so they just look online and that's the first thing that comes up, so it gets repeated again and again and again. For me, I think it makes my work poorer if you only look at it with those glasses on, because I think there are other things going on. And the other conceptual side of my work is that I'm trying to understand what is photography and how does that relate to cinema, because I'm working with moving images. It's also basically this question of, so what is an image? And then from there, which is, I think the simplest questions, which sound really stupid, are the hardest ones to answer. And that's what I'm trying to do with my work. So with this question of, okay, why am I so attracted to certain found footage and certain images that I find? And then I was starting to think about collections of images, and then realizing that my work, which is then going into museums and into collections, it's sort of becoming part of a larger whole, and archives. So how do they work? And then also understanding that a museum, for example, is quite a new invention, only a couple of 100 years old. And archives, again, that's a whole, an archive is never finished, and there should always be some chaos in an archive, but it's always a striving for total systematic organization. So then I end up doing a really big project about this crazy archive in Belgium, which was trying to collect and catalogue all human knowledage, which is again utopian.
Yes,
so,
and that is the work you can see, an installation you can see in Krems.
Yeah.
So So that's really interesting. But I think also the motive and the idea of shadow and of the shadow and the mirror, that is also something you are working with in several of your works.
Yes.
And I think we should maybe, because time is running, we should also talk a little bit about the commission work.
Grey glass.
Grey glass. So because there the mirror is a very strong motive and strong instrument for the depiction of the world.
Yeah.
Maybe you can explain the idea.
Yeah.
For that.
Yeah. So I've had this image in my head for quite some years, and here now finally the right ingredients came together that I could do something with this image in my head. And the image is a story; it's an anecdote, and I think it's Goethe, but I haven't actually been able to verify that, so maybe I'm wrong. But the story is that whenever that is, I don't know, 15th, 16th, 17th century, that mirrors larger than a hand are so expensive that they cost at least as much as a small village. And I found this such a strange comparison that I always remember it. That the only place where mirrors like that could be made was in Italy. That makes sense. I somehow imagine somewhere like Venice or something like that, with Murano glass. Mm-hmm. and that to transport them over the Alps to Germany from Italy. See, I think it's Goethe's journal of his Italian trip, but I don't know. That rather than transporting them the normal way, which would be on the back of a donkey, it's transported. They think that's too precious, so they only entrust it to be carried singularly on the back of a man or woman, but let's say man. So since then, I have had this image in my head of a lone hiker crossing across the Alps with a mirror on his strap to his back. And then my mirror is not packed up carefully, but it's exposed with the mirror side that you can see it. And while he's climbing up the mountains, it's catching the sun sometimes. And so all you see is sometimes this flash of light. So that was kind of just this very, very small starting point for this piece. And then it seemed like now was the possibilities maybe coming together that I could actually do it, and you and your team were really helpful with finding the right locations here. And then so I was thinking about landscape and about landscape painting, and yeah, I don't quite remember how, but then I heard about this grey glass, which is another word for a clawed glass, which is another word for a black mirror. And these are these small convex mirrors that used to be pocket sized. You could put them in your pocket. And in the 18th century, painters would use them quite a lot. They were very popular. Now they are completely forgotten. And in England, they became very popular from a poet called Thomas Gray, who wrote a journal of his walking trip around the Lake District. And he would walk to the top of a hill and then think, oh, that's a beautiful view. I'm going to enjoy that view. So he would sit down, spend a few hours there and take out his grey glass and then look at the view behind him. And these mirrors, they are darkened. And so they reduce the contrast and sort of the tonality is reduced, like in a painting. Mm-hmm. And it flattens the image, so it's making an image out of the landscape. And I think this is obviously not only key to romantic painting, which was like, you know, if you compare landscape paintings from Bruegel, which is like 2 centuries before, with, you know, obviously someone like Caspar David Friedrich, the difference is huge. Mm-hmm. And I'd never really thought about that before, and it's all there in the picture. So I thought that was really, really interesting to think about, and then to think about the fact that actually, you know, even the way we think about landscape as a picture is very strong, and it has a lot to do with how we think about nature. And so, you know, obviously we're all really, really worried about climate change and about the problematic situation we're in, but I feel as an artist that it's not enough just to say that's bad, you know, look how terrible everything is. But I wanted to try and reflect on it on a sort of more philosophical, more fundamental level, to sort of understand, so where does all this come from? So that's, you know, all the big thoughts that I try to put into a work, but in the end it's just the work. Yes. You know, it is what it is. And I decided to film in black and white, and had a really great, young, very talented actor who just graduated from the Mozarteum here, Sebastian Jäkel, and he very willingly went up and down snowy slopes for me again and again and again. And we also filmed in the amazing Ice Wiesenwelt, which is this incredible cave and ice landscape. So that's the piece. It's a 3-screen piece, and it doesn't actually have much of a narrative. quite a careful choreography, and it's pointing towards some things, but I think it's just a kind of an experience that you should.
But that's also work that is dealing with the aesthetics of the sublime. So, and there's difference between the sublime and the picturesque. And that because I cannot remember if you had said that, because this cloud glass that is convex, so that means that it's a sort of distance, it's a distance to the landscape, so it's more far away, and that makes it more visible. So it was interesting. Also, I read about Thomas Gray that people were really. They want to rebuild the landscape. So the nature should be different from not only rough nature. It should also be the picturesque landscape means that it should be should fit to a special view, and so it's the landscape, the nature as a picture. That was the most important.
And this is the start of landscape design also. So also parks and gardens had to sort of be a view that you look at.
Yes.
And actually Thomas Gray's publication is the start of the fact that the Lake District still today is like this place where you have to go. It's like it's a fantastic touristic destination in Great Britain. So it's a sort of a starting point of many things. And yes, I think almost any work about a mountain is also dealing or can deal with the sublime, because that's so closely connected to that, and that's also really interesting.
There's one point I want to emphasize, that is the immersive effect of sound in your works. So because that is very important. So also in Grey Glass, because it's an experience in the space, and there are 3 screens, and you cannot see everything at one time. So you have to look around, and then it depends. The experience of the work depends really on the sound, and that is I think that is a core issue for many of your works.
Yeah, I think sound. I think sound in cinema is something which is underrated. It's actually a good soundtrack can make or break a film. It's so important, and it's at a more subversive and subconscious level than where as human beings we are visually very conscious and very occupied. They say 80% of our brain is going towards processing visual images, but we're always hearing, and it's always there, and it can be very determining sound. So I'm always very conscious of it, and luckily I have a very good sound designer whom I've worked with for a very long time, who's also my partner and the father of my children. So yeah, I always find this very important. So that on the one hand, and then also this other thing which also keeps on coming back is my interest in voiceover. So how does text and image, how do they relate, and how can they, it's always this goal of 1 + 1 = 3 or 4.5 rather than just 2. And I still feel like I haven't explored all those possibilities yet. So every now and then I keep on coming back to that.
Okay. I think maybe we should open the discussion. If there are hopefully some questions.
Yeah, I've got one question. Before I came here to hear your talk, I took the chance to see some minutes of the piece that you had in the Biennale.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now during the talk, you were talking about photography and the how you try to stretch it out on the one hand, as with the pieces when you film portraits, for example, and on the one and on the other hand, how you can expand still images, like the pickpocket when you add some story to the still image. And then you were talking about the Fuji mountain, that you had such a huge amount of images from very different views, as very different point of views and standing perspectives and so on. And then I wondered, or please tell us how you decided which kind of images you chose for the disorient piece, because you could have taken totally different image material to add to the Marco Polo. Yeah, so I was wondering if it's a very, very typical characteristic of photography, what kind of point of view you choose to make an image. You can take, if you make a 2 meters on your right side, you have a very different point of view and angle. So you could have taken very different images to add it to the Marco Polo.
Right. I'm trying to think back now to when I was making the piece. So so the first screen, which is filmed in the pavilion, you know, this film set, I decided to, you know, because I'm not a trained cinematographer, I quite often feel like I've been learning about camera work by doing. And so with filming there, I decided to work with what's called dollies. So these very slow camera movements, which are sort of riding into or out of the set. And so this feels all very controlled and very beautiful and, well, kind of perfect, if you like. And it's all very flowing, just sort of never ending one. And there's also crossfades, one shot goes into the other. So it's all very appealing and very floating, if you like. And I was thinking about this juxtaposition of the realities that I know of and some of the other screen, I decided to find footage for every place that Marco Polo was describing, and then I wanted it to be documentary, so that was like the first thing, and I wanted it to be recent, and I wanted it to be real, so not from fiction, and that you could sort of read this, that you would know, then it was actually quite a rush to find this material and then get the permission to use it. So I remember quite clearly going to, in the Netherlands you have a city called Hilversum where all the television stations are, and someone said to me, you should try this journalist who is working for one of these current affairs programs, right? So where they go and film an item in Iran or Iraq. Because I wanted, for example, Baghdad, I wanted footage of the recent war in Iran. But then the problem is if you go to a proper press agency like Reuters, then you have to pay a lot of money for it. So I didn't have that money, so I thought, oh boy, I want it to be real, I don't want it to be fake, and I don't want it to come from a movie. So how do I get this material? And so I remember clearly going to the television station and then sitting outside waiting for the journalist to come out. I waited for him for 2 hours. And then I just sort of said, hi, I'm Fiona Tan. You don't know me, but I'm doing this, and I would really appreciate it if you would let me look at some of your footage. And he was sort of like, okay, hang on a minute. And then he went back into his office and then grabbed some of these little mini DV tapes and sort of said, make sure I get them back. right?
Okay.
And then I just looked at it, and I mean, actually, this is the best kind of material because it's unedited, and it's and so okay. So from him, I have some of these shots of sitting in one of these, I think it's Iranian or taxis, where the windscreen is broken, and then there's some Islamic motif. And so you're sort of riding through the desert together with this journalist, you know, you're embedded or you're on the... and these feel really real. So I was working, and then also an archivist from the news, he helped me also. And so I was explaining to him, okay, so I need footage from Pakistan, I need footage from Afghanistan, I need footage from the Gobi Desert, you know, from these sorts of things, and from Turkmenistan, and from all these amazing places. And, you know, in the beginning I was thinking, okay, I go there and I film it. But I didn't have the money and I didn't have the time. And also, you know, these are not easy places to go to. So I ended up working in this way. And, you know, and then just trying to, and I did use some of my own footage. So some footage that I shot in Indonesia is in there, and in China and in Japan. And then other things from cameraman I know from India. And so I was just getting what I could. And yeah, I mean, I remember very clearly the archivist, he said, okay, I'll see what I can do for you, you know, but you can only pay me for 4 hours, so, you know, I don't have much time. And I'm, oh, please, you know. And he said at some point, well, I have a car on top of a camel, how does that sound?
It's in there. Wondering if it could have been much more romantic, for example.
Yeah, I know what you're getting at, but I think I explained through this that I didn't want that. Yeah. There's an interesting thing about fiction and documentary, interesting difference, and you know, so Ascent is maybe also similar because all the images are real, they're all documentary, but the story that I wrote, which you hear when you sit down and watch that piece, is totally fictional. So yeah, well, not totally, but the figures, the love stories is fictional. Yeah.
Question? How much of your projects are sort of at the start and how they finish? How much is the finish as you've envisioned it at the start? Because there's a lot of improvising to what you find and work with.
It can change a lot. It depends. So like I was saying, Ascent, I first thought would be a short piece and ended up being a big piece, a long piece. But I recently read the proposal that I wrote for Grey Glass, and I was quite surprised actually, because it's all there, like quite precisely, even in terms of the footage I want to film and how I imagine it in the space. And even though during the making process I was doubting all the time, I think it's important to keep some. It shouldn't be fixed. You need to sort of be open to chance happenings and to presents that come along, and obviously things can go wrong, and you know, failure is an important part. But yeah, so sometimes it seems to be quite true to my very first idea, and sometimes there's a development which I wasn't expecting, but I think that's a good thing. Yeah. Sorry, that was a vague answer. Anyway. Yeah.
Just to follow up, and how much of it is, say, storyboarded, so when you're working with dollies and so frames, I was wondering how much of that's planned out?
Yeah, that's at the end of the day a kind of a financial question. So, and also an experience thing. So I used to storyboard really carefully everything, because I was not very used to working in that way. And these days, you know, because I'm producing things myself, so I've hired the whole crew, and then I sort of, you know, you have this thing in your back of your head, like every minute costs, you know, so, you know, if I fuck this up, you know, sorry, you know, you have to make the most of your day, and I feel a huge responsibility to the people I work with, that I only think people can work well for you if you can tell them what you want. And that's a hard thing to do, so you have to really try and communicate that really well in whichever way that's necessary. And so yeah, I do try and be really well prepared. I quite often feel like shooting is like you know, athletes. It's like the Olympics. You have to build up to that, and then you have to be in top form. So you have a few days to get it, and that's it. And then all the time before and all the time after, it's different kind of work. But yeah, but I also, obviously, I quite enjoy that also, and I'm usually lucky. Touch wood. Yeah.
Yeah.
There is in Grey Glass, there you can see this wanderer, and he's at some point there is another group of people, but most time you see him alone.
Yeah.
And yesterday you, Thorsten Sadowsky, remarked that there is sometimes lonely people in your works, because also at in the other film, News of the Near Future, there you can see a man standing on a stone.
And it's actually ice.
Alone.
Yeah, standing on a block of ice.
Oh, it's ice, okay.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah.
And so I wanted to ask, I mean, because you mentioned Caspar David Friedrich before, and so to me as an art historian, there is this lonely man. Of course, there is a connection to Caspar David Friedrich, and I just wanted to ask you, yeah, if loneliness or being alone in a landscape, I mean, if, yeah.
Well,
maybe
this
you
is
can tell us,
yeah.
tell me something about it.
Yeah. I think it's a cinematic trope in many ways. So almost all cinema has one protagonist. You can check it out. Almost every film, you're following always one person. And it seems to be sort of also in literature. It seems to be the way we can easily identify with something. And I think also it's very much a romantic idea of being alone with nature. And obviously, you know, the wanderer looking over the sea of fog, so this very, very famous Caspar David Friedrich picture, which was obviously in my mind, is emblematic of that. I mean, it's a kind of a Western thing, isn't it? Because we tend to think of ourselves as these individuals engaged in the world. And I'm not sure how. I don't think it's a very conscious thing that I do that, but I just feel it's the way the piece is going to work. And in News from the Near Future, yeah, he's sort of the bookends of the piece. So the piece starts and finishes with him, but he's not lonely. He's just sort of having fun. Actually, I think, you know, he's just sort of, hey, look at this, you know. So actually, that piece is kind of populated, but you never see anyone, or almost never see anyone. It's just water most of the time. I mean, okay, there's ships and all the rest of it, but mostly people jumping into the water. But that's hardly individual, actually. It's always groups of people. And in grey glass, these figures, they're kind of, I imagine them sort of like dream. So are they real? Are they not real? And he's kind of sleeping when, you know, is the large screen in the cave, that's kind of not really real. It's sort of in his mind, or it's sort of a projection of what's in his mind, I think, a lot of the time.
Thanks.
Okay.
I have one question, maybe. It's a little bit larger probably, but since you talked about the juxtapositions in your work, and that you often deal with documentary and fiction, and you, in the interview with Eva Sangiorgi, I do this because you hardly understand, I guess.
Yeah.
You are also telling her that you don't like categories at all.
Yeah.
And what I think is very interesting is in your work is that you are refusing to fill into these categories. You open up spaces in a visual term, but also very much in a thinking out of the box term.
Mm-hmm.
So what is your approach to space, not being only physical, but only a thought space? Do you think of these dimensions at all?
Yeah, yes, I think so. I'm not sure how much consciously, but I mean, space is really important. I go to a lot of care in trying to work with space as well as I possibly can, and to design every single exhibition I make with working with the architecture, but in the best possible way. So that's like literally talking about space, but I think you're referring to a different kind of space, a mental space. So this has to do with my the fact that I live in the Netherlands. Maybe Dutch cinema has quite a strong documentary school. So there are Joris Evans, and there are some really great documentary filmmakers. And fictional movies in the Netherlands is nothing to be particularly excited about or proud of. It is what it is. I notice that I feel like I'm coming more from a documentary leaning. I'm more interested in like real life, if you like, but I have ended up working with actors and working with fiction. But I've always felt that it's kind of a arbitrary boundary between documentary and fiction. And in the film world, that's very strongly placed, this border, because you have film festivals which are only showing documentaries and film festivals which are only showing fiction, and you could argue that that is really quite silly, because almost all documentary is staged to a certain extent, some more than others, and a lot of fiction is working with people who are not actors, with sort of hidden cameras, with improvised scenes, with and they're also borrowing a lot of fictional documentary sort of style. So the camera has to be handheld to give you the feeling of real, undirected reality and all this kind of thing. So there's a lot of, and I knew that Eva from the Biennale, that she had taken away this boundary, so I thought that was would be an interesting topic to discuss with her.
Yeah. What I also meant is that also in the content, we often blur the boundaries between what is a very personal memory opposed to historical facts.
Yeah.
And then again, historical facts are always written down by somebody, so it's always it's never, it's very subjective, not objective at all, actually.
Yeah.
That's something we tend to forget.
Yeah.
That there's always more to one truth, more than one truth, actually. Yeah. And I found this very interesting, that in so many different aspects, these juxtapositions open up new spaces of thought. And also how you use the space in your films that adds up so much of history, but then again, you can, on the one hand, you can read history, for example, in the Lapse of Memory in the pavilion, the British Pavilion, but then again, you can make up your own ideas and own histories at the same time. So it's always, also as a spectator, you have several possibilities to read and think your works or continue after you've observed them. And that was very interesting.
Thank you. Yeah, you know, you shouldn't always ask the artist. The artist can't always talk about their work in the best way.
So that's the reason why we are organizing artist talks. Other questions or contributions? Okay, so I think yes, it's okay. Yes, 1 hour and 15 minutes. So that is okay, and it's quite hard to sit there with a mask, I think. So
and it's 15 minutes to doomsday, right?
Yes. Okay. Yes. Thank you very much for coming, and Fiona, thank you very much for this talk. It was very interesting. We have got a lot of new information, and thank you very much for all that you did for us.
Thank you to the museum and to your staff.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Ja, und dann hoffentlich bis bald und bleiben Sie gesund.
Yeah, that's very important.